This is the new, improved Adam and Sheridan Show video podcast right here on YouTube. And we're recording here in the studio where we do our radio show.
Capitalism, communism, social ownership. We received a challenge, so we're actually going to kind of do a different thing. We received a challenge to define capitalism from a contributor to our radio show, James, who's been on it,
Yes.
and you know, our token libertarian friend. So he challenged us to define capitalism, and so we kind of went to the whiteboard to brainstorm.
Take a look.
We didn't think that quite met the criteria,
We thought it may be a little harsh,
so
or not harsh enough.
So we tried again, and here we go.
So that there, that's what I call progress.
I think so.
But not, again, you know, we're nothing if not fickle. So we decided, you know, let's really sit down and hash this out.
And the challenge specifically was that we were calling capitalism, we were using capitalism as too broad a blanket term. What we talked about as capitalism, James thought of as corporatism, where corporations and the government are in bed together. And so we decided to sit down and have a conversation about it. So at this point, let's start off a conversation with the with a baseline definition. And the definition that I'm going to go from right now is found on Marxist.org. Capitalism is the first sentence of a several paragraph long definition. So we'll read, capitalism is, I'm destroying the desk.
That's okay.
Capitalism is the socio-economic system where social relations are based on commodities for exchange, in particular private ownership of the means of production and on the exploitation of wage labor.
So now, James Evans was the person who asked us to define our terms because he's under the impression that capitalism as a term is different from the word corporatism.
He believes that capitalism means the functioning of free markets, whereas we believe capitalism is capitalists using wage labor, that is a proletariat selling their wage labor to add value to what the capitalists own, and the capitalists keep all that value, where the capitalists own all the means of production. So that is the system under which we're living. However, this creates some problems, so I'm going to play devil's advocate, and we'll have a conversation.
Apparently I'm the person here who has to stand up for both
But he
of us.
does, no, but he does have a point. I'm going to kind of do this too.
Can I lean back in the, no.
No, you can't.
Okay.
No, you can't.
Squeaky.
We're
Okay.
making this a farce.
No, we're taking this very seriously because James is going to be the first view of this. So.
I hope. But essentially, well, let's talk about financialization. Financialization kind of takes it out of the equation because there are no capitalists owning the means of production in a direct way, and there are no wage laborers creating value. Essentially, what they're doing is moving capital, which is used to purchase the means of production, and with that movement or that bundling or buying, they're creating value with no proletariat. So, does that fit into capitalism? What is that?
Well, what that is, actually, it's a very good point, and it's a new phenomenon. It started around the late 1970s, and it certainly has taken off today. What you're doing when you're engaging in financialization is you're actually buying a deed to future productivity. So, in other words, when you bundle in all of these stocks and mortgages or what have you, what you're doing is you're saying, in the future, when these things are made, I'm going to have a stake in the profit off of the sale of those items. You're not actually getting...
but think about currency exchanges. Currency exchanges don't exist in that capitalist proletarian production of goods kind of thing. So if capitalism is exclusively capitalists owning the means of production and wage labor proletarians creating value.
Mm-hmm.
Does this fit in? Does trading in currency fit in? Can this be included?
Well, I don't know exactly how currency trading differs from what you were mentioning earlier about financialization. In other words, someone who's just
Trading based on we'll say speculation.
Okay.
Speculation creates value, which is devoid of all future. Well, it's not devoid of all future productivity, but it's outside the productivity. It creates value before productivity.
It creates value before productivity, but ultimately it has to be tied to productivity in the future at some point. If not, then it ends up not being worth anything.
Okay.
So that's ultimately why Marx's analysis of capitalism is still relevant, because, and he talks about fictitious capital in Capital Volume 1, I believe.
As a late version, as basically late capitalism, which is why a lot of socialist organizations and socialist periodicals will talk about this as late capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of think it's interesting because it's a convolution. It's capitalists creating capital and creating value without proletarians.
Yeah, without productivity, without producing anything.
Which is interesting to me. So I think.
But what happens though when you take that to the extent that happened in 2008? If you don't end up producing anything, and you've created all that financialization, what ends up happening if you don't produce anything is it goes bust.
I didn't even think of that. Actually, I thought I was going to kind of have you here, but
no. Ultimately, what happens is all of that paper that says I have value you end up jumping off of a building because it doesn't have any value.
Especially because banks will loan, and there are two different things that come out of this point, which I'm going to make. There's loaning payroll. So banks will loan companies payroll so that they can pay their employees, and then there's something which is payday loans,
those are awful.
which is awful. Which is
because the interest rate is what, 20% or something like
ridiculous.
that. Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
What happens is you're borrowing money on your paycheck,
Yep.
and then when you get paid.
Arise, you prisoners of salvation, arise, you wretched of the earth.
In true Sheridan Show style, or Adam and Sheridan Show style.
You used to call it the Sheridan Show?
I just called it the Sheridan Show.
He's going to knock me off one of these days.
What's going to happen? This is going to be me sitting here like Walter Cronkite. But essentially, we had a technical issue in that I didn't change the batteries.
This is why it's run of the seat of the pants kind of thing, right?
That's a problem. But that was a good weird place to
So
end.
does everyone understand financialization and why it's
we sound like pedantic teachers at this moment.
Yeah, does everyone understand that? Raise your hand.
Because we're the authorities. No, we're trying to make this more conversant, more interesting. But James's huge exception, his big exception, was that we were talking about capitalism. Again, he just said capitalism is the free market. Capitalism equates to the free market. That's his thing, and the free market cures all. But one of his big things is that what takes this away from capitalism and the free market is that you have corporate ownership of the means of production, and they are in bed with the government, and the government skews the market. So the one huge thing I want to address, and I just want to mention this quickly because we both agree on it. What he says assumes a perfect market, so perfect competition, which has never existed.
Nope.
And it assumes an almost prescient consumer, someone who's going to know exactly where every part of everything was made, know how the workers were treated, know how, know the environmental impact, know exactly what the company paid for it, what they're marking up, and everything like that. So you have to be prescient. Yes, exactly. So the market requires an extremely vigilant consumer and extremely open corporations. Right. And we know we don't have that right now because corporate donations are hidden as much as they possibly can to government politicians, basically. So that's what he says takes it away from capitalism. But Marx said something about the state under capitalism.
Well, what Marx basically said, and Trotsky and Lenin backed him up on this, he said that capitalism is, the state functions under capitalism as a way to enforce the law in terms of property rights for the ruling class. So in other words, it only exists, well, not only, but it primarily exists to make sure that if company X owns this much land and this much equipment, that the state makes sure that that company gets to keep that equipment. And it also acts as an arbiter between the working class and the bourgeoisie, and it usually sides on the side of the bourgeoisie. To the extent that it doesn't is the extent of class warfare, and how much the working class has been able to be vigilant and unify and rise up.
And the thing,
which happened a lot during the 30s.
The thing that I think is really interesting is when the United States develops ties with a company, or when the government becomes stable, or when there's a coup, the United States says, okay, we're going to develop relationships with the company. Mm-hmm. The first thing that happens is a trade deal. The first thing that happens. So I don't think, again, James, this is, the government is not divorced from capital, because it's got to deal with nation states. It's in nation states. It deals with national money and stuff like that. So I mean, yes, if you want to change it to, you know, a radical right libertarian utopia, then you could do something like that.
Remember during the,
I don't think so.
Well, no, not exactly, but during
Not
the
exactly.
during the 1870s to the 1920s, we had, well, 1910s, we had, before Theodore Roosevelt came around, we had basically no child labor laws, no 8-hour day, no weekend, no overtime. You know, corporations had the ability.
We had very little regulation.
Yeah, we had the ability to exploit our workers as much as we wanted to.
The way
and
that,
we were very productive.
Owners had the right to kill their workers. Frankly, if they would strike, then they could kill them. Mm-hmm. If they decided to occupy their plant or something like that.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was ridiculous. And
so
and then,
if you want to ask the population, do you want to go back to those days? I'm sure they
Yeah.
would say no in a resounding, loud fashion.
So essentially, you know, our definition of capitalism, having been challenged to give it, is private ownership of the means of production and the value created by wage labor. Mm-hmm. And the proletarians not owning the means of production.
Right.
You know, no matter how many small businesses there are, owning the means of production, even owning I would argue capital is a means of production at this point. Capital is a means of production. People can make money off money. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have enough money, you can't really do that to a great extent. So, you know, I honestly think money has become a means of production. And so
another thing to keep in mind,
it all fits. So whenever we say capitalism, we mean that.
And the common denominator between what your idea of corporatism is and how we define capitalism is the elevation of private profit over everything. Mm-hmm. So that's what we ultimately oppose. We oppose subordinating human needs over private profit. Yeah. And whether that's, you call it capitalism or call it corporatism, both of those things do that. Yeah. So.
Hopefully this has been interesting.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be a conversation, give and take, back and forth, and I think in that we have soundly failed. Mm-hmm. But
as
hopefully,
yeah,
that was, you know, ridiculous. But we agree on this point. This is such a basic point. So hopefully we're going to get into more conversations. We're going to get into more interesting stuff. This is the grand return. Mm-hmm. So let us know what you think. Let us know where you'd like us to go.
adamandsheridanshow@gmail.com. And of course, subscribe to the YouTube channel here.
Facebook.
Yep. And listen to our radio show on
WRFALP.com
or WRFALP 107.9 on the radio if you're in Jamestown.
Yep.
If not, then you're going to have to go to the internet.
Twitterverse. Check out our SoundCloud. Check out all that stuff. And we'll see you next IDES.
I'm Adam Courtwright.
I'm Sheridan. Stay active.
Good. Good job.
Well, one should hope.
Give me a minute here. Get the Oreo down.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a thing too, so I'm going to be clearing my throat.
Help yourself.
Unfortunately. No, thank you.